communities and sometimes a little bit in the background, but also the local, the municipalities also have their representatives at the ICEG. So at ICEG, it's more or less a high-level working group or a high-level group. But under the umbrella of ICEG, we have several working groups, and including a working group or a review group on open standards. So what does it mean? Well, we will work together to create standards, mostly semantic standards. So if you're interested in looking at what we're doing, everything is in the open. So you can also visit our nice GitHub page or GitHub repository containing semantic standards. If you want to comment on them, you're very welcome. If you want to use them, well, of course, you're also welcome to do so. We have working groups, so mostly it's about things that would be interesting for administration. So don't expect some nifty standards on gaming or whatever. It's more on the, let's say, the more traditional stuff, like how are we modeling organizations? How do we discover services? And provide some models and examples on how to implement those things. The basic idea is that we reuse as much as possible. So when I was still in college, my professor said to me, if you're a good IT guy, you have to be lazy. And that actually applies to standards as well. There is no need to reinvent standards if there are already existing standards that could be used. But nonetheless, it often happens that we want to add some additional information, or that there are standards that are not quite up to the level we would like it to be. So in that case, we can just draft a charter. We invite people to participate, experts in the field, and we work together to actually produce set standard or specification. Once again, it is a cooperation between several administrations within Belgium. So the idea really is to have a broad participation, regardless if you're a municipality or a region or some other entity that has a relation with Belgium. We have online meetings, like the rest of the world. And we try to make it an iterative process. So next slide, please. As you see, well, it's an iterative process. It means that you create a charter, you want to create something, so you define some use cases, you ask people to participate, you develop something, and probably it's not the best version you came up with, so it will go through several iterations to make it better and better and better. Those standards are published, and of course, once they are published, there are still possibilities to change the standard to improve them. And there is also a possibility that at some point in time, it could be that the standard is not very useful anymore. In that case, it just, phased out or not used anymore. We do have a small guide on how we develop standards, the process of developing open standards and specifications. It's very like the international bodies like W3C, IETF do. So it's not something that we've reinvented, but those who might be interested in the process itself and how things are working, feel free to look into the process and methods for development of data standards guide. Next slide, please. So we are going to talk about linked data, of course, and the first, next slide, please. The first thing is, if we talk about interoperability, what does it mean? Interoperability, It's a nifty word, but actually it's just making things working together. Not only things, not only systems, but also organizations. And that's something that sometimes is easily forgotten. People talk about protocols, about technical stuff, about XML, RDF, you name it, but they tend to forget that behind all those specifications, there are also organizations and persons that have to work together. And more often than not, the main issues are not technical, because those are often the things you can solve, but more or less on, let's say, the legal or the organizational level, that things may go wrong. Next slide, please. So why is it important? Well, if you're a citizen, and well, by birth you all are a citizen of this wonderful nation, there is undoubtedly many points in time that you have to ask for certain services. Often you want something, and then you go to the local government. So your municipality, your town hall is often the first point of contact. If you want to get your driver license, if you want to get your ID card, if you have to obtain a building permit, often you have to go to, or you can go to the local government. That also means that they are very much in favor, or they should be very much in favor of hiding all the complexity. As you are well aware of, Belgium is a very complex landscape. So we have different levels of governments. We have a staggering amount of public services, agencies, administrations, and a mind-boggling number of information systems. And what we want to achieve is that, of course, we provide services for the citizens, and that means that we, as the government, in plural, work together to provide those services. If we wouldn't do that, well, then it's up to the citizen to print some papers and collect all the papers and materials, send it to another government, and there's no end to it. So we are more or less obliged to work together to provide the citizens to the want or the companies that want to have a service. Next slide, please. In this workshop, we're going to talk about semantics. Semantics are important because it depends a little bit on the viewpoint. If you have in this picture an elephant and you would ask a random number of people and blindfold them, what is this object? They will all come up with a different definition. Some people may say it's a tree. Some people may think it's a wall, but in fact, it's all part of the same elephant. Also, the opposite is true. If you want to ask different persons, and you ask them, for instance, what is salary? Salary is something that could be something with benefits or without benefits. It could be before taxes, it could be after taxes. Salary per month, salary per year. So we really have to think about providing additional meaning to the words that, or the definitions we want to use. It's not only about, well, making sure the words align, it's also about their definition. Next slide, please. As mentioned, since we are going to talk about semantic interoperability, but there are actually 4 levels of interoperability. You can easily memorize them. If you take the first letters, it's LOST, so L-O-S-T. And actually that's quite correct. If you do not have all the 4 layers in place on interoperability, it's easy to get lost. As mentioned, people often think about interoperability about technical stuff, making sure that the tags are present, making sure that the formats are the same, but those things are often very easy to solve or to transform. It becomes a little bit harder at semantic level. Like I mentioned, what is a salary? What does it mean for different people? And that will be the focus of the workshop we are doing. And then higher up, if you want, is the organizational interoperability. The organizations providing information or services, and the legal interoperability, the laws. To give an example, technical interoperability could something be, well, like providing data about books in the library. If you have a library, well, you have no doubt you have information about all the books you have. You could use standards like DMARC, if I recall correctly. I'm not a librarian, to make sure that all the metadata is aligned. And that works quite well, but at the organizational level, you also want to make sure that all the libraries within your region do it the same way. If you provide, for instance, a list online or an API to publish something online in one municipality, but the other municipality only provides lists every year, so they do not update it regularly, then you already have a mismatch there. So something could go wrong there. And well, where it does get interesting is the legal interoperability. If, for instance, the legal department would say, well, you do not have the rights to publish those data sets or this kind of information, well, once again, there is no real interoperability and there is no exchange. So to summarize, lost. Take care about 4 levels of interoperability. If not, you will run in some kind of trouble. And I think it's time for the next speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bart. So hi, my name is Sven Dieber. I'm a data manager at KBR and also a PhD student at Ghent University ID Lab. And I will show you in a few slides a little bit of the technical interoperability, because this is a bit about hands-on. And of course, we don't want you to be good policymakers, but to get some hands-on on linked data. So what you can see here roughly are like 4 principles which are important to linked data. And you see like a graph of data, because that is what linked data actually is. It's data which is linked in a graph. Imagine you have tables in a database and every column might have a name. And that's not very interoperable because it has a different meaning for different persons. So we're going to look a bit into what persistent identifiers are, so that you really can pinpoint and say this specific thing I have, which I would link to other things. It's also important that you can dereference it. And in the end, linked data is actually based on the web itself, because every thing you give it an ID is actually a URL in your browser, or more concrete, a URI. And the idea is that if a browser goes to it, it might just see some HTML text. But there should be some dereferenceability. So if you go to such an ID, you should see something at least. And then, of course, it is important what you will see, which is then the standardized information you will have included in this web page or / like just the data, basically. And of course, that you also will link it then in the end to other data. So next slide, please. So for the persistent identifiers, as mentioned, linked data makes use of the web. So you can see here a URL like Data Vlaanderen, and then a very specific subpage of it. And this is basically unique worldwide, because that's how these URLs work in the web. And in this case, you can see already that if you go to this link, you see this, for example, specifies now a specific address in Ghent in the Koningin Maria Hendrika Plein 17. And next slide, please. And the idea is now that if you would go to this URL in your browser, you would actually see something. And usually your browser, the way it is programmed, it's meant for human consumption. So the browser actually says to the server, hey, please give me the human readable version. So that's why you always see the HTML pages when you go to such an address. But actually the web is also built, the standards, the way it is built. You can also specify and ask the web server, hey, please give me this information in a different format. And that's basically where linked data also comes in, because basically you can specify, please give me the same resource under this ID, but please in a different format, where you can specify, for example, an XML version of RDF, which is the resource description format in which linked data is basically described. And actually also very interesting here is that our lab in Ghent is actually situated in the Technologiepark in Zwenaarde. And a few years ago, the city of Ghent decided to change the whole addresses in the Technologiepark. So we used to before have the building number 19, but it became then the building number 122. And the good thing is, because they use this linked data in this standard here, if you go there, there's just a new ID for it. And actually, you can actually link as well between the old ID and the new ID. So there was not much difficulties with the data. Next slide, please. Now important, as I mentioned, if you go to such a URL, you would like to get something. Of course, the HTML version for humans, but also for the computer, the machine readable things like the RDF standard. So it's important to use standards for this too. And there are also many ways we can define things. And like Bart already mentioned, on some, there are also different levels. So starting from a lowest level, for instance, in the Flemish context, there's the Oslo standard, which defines RDF vocabularies. So basically terms and concepts, relationships people can use to define their contexts. But of course, it makes use of an already existing higher level model all the time. So for instance, you have on the Belgian level several standards, but also on a European level with the ISA square, which again also reuses international standards from W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium, basically the people who define all and specify all the technical specifications of the web itself. And these things are then reused. And this is basically very helpful then for interoperability, because if now I'm in a Flemish context to find something with the Oslo standard, because it's linked to this international standards, if I would use now another standard, they both have something in common which they share, so they are still interoperable. So in this case, you see some two URIs, like how on the Flemish context an address is modeled, and actually on a higher level, it reuses this admin unit L2, which is a very generic thing on a more global level, because addresses are sometimes varying much between different countries. Next slide, please. And of course, it's linked data, so it should be linked as well. So you should not just define just new text strings in your data. So if you have these IDs, you can actually link to them, and you link resources. So you link the actual IDs, not specific representations in different formats. So in this case, you can say that AIW, the Agentschap Informatie Vlaanderen, which is the digital department of Vlaanderen, is situated and located here at this specific location. And this is basically the way how then linked data is achieved, because you just point to another resource. All right, next slide, please. That's also it from my side, and I will give then the floor to the next speaker.
Thanks, Sven. Good afternoon, everyone. Maybe before we dive into a specific example, let's link back to what Bart presented a bit earlier, and the example of the elephant, just reminding us that, yeah, what we heard before in the two previous presentations is always about how you define things. It's always about the context you are in it and the perspective you look at, with which you look at things. And let's really dive together in a concrete example in the next slide. And before that, let's also maybe briefly ask you a question. Could you put in the chat if you are familiar with the concept of linked data, or if you've never heard about it? Put a +1 if you are familiar with it, put a -1 if you've never heard of it. This is simply to also see a bit, okay, who are we dealing with today? So I see a lot of +1s, a few -1s. In any case, we will go through the example. Huh? Thanks, Bart, for answering as well. Okay, great. And also so many people joining, that's great. Okay, let's deep dive together into the example. So basically, how can we understand each other when it comes to data exchanges? And here we will use the example of a bike counter. So, you know, a small tool that basically counts the bikes that are passing through the roads during a certain period of time. How could different tools managed by different organizations capture such information and describe it? And you see here two examples of descriptions, one in JSON format, another in tables. And what we can quickly see is the two are really different. What do I mean? For example, when you look at the type, one organization will describe this as a bicycle counter, while the other will describe it as bike passage counter. Another one will say, oh, it's within the city of Ghent, while the other will say it's not a city, it's a specific location, and the location is Waregem. Again, you see that one will describe it 100 counts would be what was counted today. So with a timestamp basically, while the other will say, oh, let's basically give a number without time frame and say 250. Those are just simple examples of how things can be described differently. And if we go then to the next slide, let's focus a bit more on the JSON. And this is basically where we see, okay, as humans, we can make those comparisons quite quickly and make assumptions to say, oh, maybe today and 100 is actually the same as the number of counts 250 that we saw in the previous. And when we go to the next, how could a machine understand that? Because basically, as humans, we are able to make quick comparisons, but machines don't. Machines actually need clear instructions to know how to process information. And that's where basically the concept also of triples was created, where basically each concept is always related to another concept, like something as a relation with something else, or in triple terms, a subject as predicates that predicates towards an object. And those three are very important. For example, here, the fietsteller Zuid is the data subject, and it's related to the data object bicycle counter by using the predicate type. So basically in JSON, as we see it, fietsteller Zuid type is bicycle counter. And we can go on for all the others. And then if we move next, yeah, that's all fine to have triples, but it doesn't solve the problem of how do we know that we mean the same thing? How do we know that each organization and this specific triple or part of triple is actually identified uniquely in order to know this part of the triple is exactly what is meant by this organization. And that's where the concept of URI that Sven described right before is used, the Uniform Resource Identifier. So basically how to identify uniquely each part of the triple so that you can know for sure and persistently that this part of the triple, this information is actually meant as actually a specific meaning, definition, and usage. And that's all fine. And here in the example, for example, we could have the URI used by and maintained by Wikipedia for bike counter, which could actually be used for the bicycle counter. Now, as Sven pointed out, it's important that the URI not only points to the HTML for human readers, but also for machine exchange, because that's what in the end we also want, is for machines to be able to exchange information and also process information. And that's exactly what we do here with another URI example with data.vlaanderen.be, and where the bike counter is also used, but that could point to the human readable and machine readable examples. And when we apply all this in the next slide with the example we had, so applying URIs throughout the example or the JSON example, we actually end up with the JSON-LD, LD for linked data, data format or serialization. And that's where basically you see that each part of the JSON format has its specific URI. And when we compare here the two examples of the beginning with the two organizations maintaining similar information in different ways in tables and JSON, and here we describe both in JSON format, we see that, for example, the bike passage counter in the second is using the exact same URI as the bicycle counter. And that's how you know that actually those two mean the same thing. The same for today and number. If we put behind the same URI, from a semantic perspective, they should have the same definition. Then that's all great, but as Bart mentioned earlier, how do we know how to describe and how to agree on the meaning and the definitions of the different terms, of the different information? And that's where the concept of vocabularies and application profiles is very important. Basically, you see on the screen some examples of an example of vocabulary, where a vocabulary describes the key fundamental terms around one concept. For example, the concept of public organization, the concept of person, the concept of, it can be anything, address, as Sven mentioned earlier. And the only thing that the vocabulary does is define really the key terms for this domain, this specific concept. While the application profiles in the next slide indeed focus really on reusing the information from the vocabularies. What are the specific data that must be exchanged? And is it data that we need to find always? So is it mandatory to have this data, or is it simply optional? So also defining cardinalities is very important. Or can we have only one piece of information, data, for an address in this example, for example, or can we have many? That's also something important. Then once we agree on how to exchange information, you can say, yeah, it's great, I'm gonna use it, and actually I'm gonna put all my my information available through an API. How can you know that what you are describing and the way you describe your information is actually compliant with the standards, is actually compliant with the vocabularies and application profiles that we have defined? And that's where the SHACL, the shapes constraints language, is used. It's on top of the linked data, formats that we use. There is basically, this is a language to automate the checks, like do you use the right URI, do you respect the cardinalities, etc., etc. So it compares the data you described in JSON-LD or another linked data format with the standards, and actually checks automatically that you respect the vocabularies and application profiles. And how can you do that? Basically, there are different tools that exist that are open source and available online, and that use different different entry points, such as REST APIs, SOAP API, etc. We can share also in the link, if you are interested, the link to the RDF validator here proposed on the slide. And basically, you introduce a link to your data source, or directly you upload the file with your descriptions, and automatically you will be able to validate by choosing the format in which you are uploading this information, and get some validation results with compliance information, such as, oh, be careful with you have a warning or an error message that the value indicated for the address is actually not a string, but should come from a code list maintained by the Publications Office of the European Union. That's just some examples. Good. I hope this was clear. And don't hesitate if you have questions in the chat. Otherwise, I propose that we move on with the actual case.
Yes, thank you, Florian, Sven, and Bart for this introduction. We have a few minutes for questions before we jump into the instruction for the exercise. So if anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand, put it in the chat, and then we can tackle the question. So far, I don't see any questions, but I'm giving you a few more seconds. Okay, and if not, don't hesitate to still put them in the chat if you would like to know something more. So now we will go into the exercise. So as I told you before, we have prepared a small case for you where we can go through, and we will make our own information model. But before that, I see that Christopher has a question. How many services are currently linked by linked data? And what do you mean maybe with services, or? Public Belgium services sharing data.
I would say disappointingly few data sets at the moment. Working on it. I must admit that the Flanders region is doing quite an excellent job on making sure that there are lots of services, or starting to have lots of services. I think one of the most noteworthy examples are the linked open data besluiten, if I recall correctly.
Yes, indeed. In Belgium, in Flanders, we are at Digital Vlaanderen. We are busy with a lot of projects where we are implementing linked open data, and indeed, as Bart is saying, local decisions as linked open data, I will put a link in the chat, is one of the most prestigious projects, I think, with regards to the linked open data. What they are doing is they are making tools and tooling, how to say, to make notulen, so describing meetings at the local cities. So, for example, indeed, the city of Ghent is also using it, so that actually the data that is now published in PDF format is now made up in a linked open database, so it's structured and it can be shared or picked up by other partners or organizations. So that's one, but also our base registries in Flanders, we are working towards making them as linked open data. I think there's a lot going on also in mobility at AWV. There are some initiatives, so there's a long list, and I cannot speak them all out right now, but if you want to know more, definitely send us an email, or say we can hook you up or show you some examples. But I think the LBLOD is a nice example. It's pretty worked out, and it's already far in the developing stage. It's rolled out already.
And interestingly as well, like to maybe make the connection with the morning where Ruben Verborg gave this talk about Solid, there's also lots of things going on around Solid, because Solid basically is built on linked data, and more people are adapting it, and especially in Belgium on the Flemish level, they're also thinking of, or they're actually adapting it in the future. So maybe you will have your own linked, like private data already as linked data. The government already hosts it for you in a way.
if I can have a shameless plug or publicity, also the exchange between data portals. So we have several data portals in Belgium, and they all have metadata. And what we are also working on or doing actively is now working on making sure that the different portals, which all have different APIs, of course, exchange the data in the same metadata in the same format. So much of the linked open data, it's also useful or is used in exchange of data, like Ruben already mentioned during the morning talk. Linked data can actually be very useful in the exchange of data between, let's say, traditional systems, even if they're not linked or actively producing linked data, it can be very useful to do so. Also on a more hidden level, if you're using CMS systems, quite often they also include some semantic markup in your web pages. So without knowing it, it could very well be that your organization is already publishing some data as linked data or as using semantic markup. And those pages are well harvested by Google and Bing, etc., etc. And they also often know a little bit about semantic markup, and they know a little bit about linked data. So if you use their vocabularies like schema.org, and if you provide proper URIs, proper identifiers, you will notice that your ranking may go up considerably. I think the Westtour, so the organization for tourism in West Flanders, has quite some experience with providing or marking up data or marking up websites semantically and using linked data without actually the people who are entering the data knowing that they're doing linked data. So that's maybe a good example as well.
Okay, so I think there are many examples which we are very proud of course. I think we should move to the instruction for the exercise. So we have prepared a little exercise which we will go through in the next hour or so. So we have 3 groups in Dutch, French, and English. And the purpose of this exercise is that we will get a little bit familiar with building implementation models. In the next slide, I will show you how we divided the groups. I hope this is readable for you all, because there were a lot of participants that have subscribed for the workshop, but I don't know how many of you are actually in here at the moment. So it might be that some groups are not balanced out evenly, but if you could for now just search for your name and remember in which group you are, that would be great. And I hope it's readable for all. But I will maybe, in the meanwhile, I will also keep on talking. So what is the purpose? I will send you also a link to another MS Teams room. And it is, we will see each other back in there after the break. But before that, I will quickly show you how we will work. So these are the links to the breakout rooms, but don't worry, I will put them also in the chat. What will we do? We have 6 steps, and after these 6 steps, we will have built our own implementation model, and we will do this together with you, with participants, and we are hoping to get some interaction with you. And so this is why we choose to work with a whiteboard. It's called Miro. For the ones who are not familiar with it, I will put already a link in the chat. Like this, voila. And then I will give a quick demo of how it works, and then we can have a small break, and after that we will see each other back. So I see a lot of people coming in. I will share my screen now. Okay, so I hope everyone is seeing my screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So what we will do is just to get familiar with Miro, I will show you how it works. So what I'm doing now, I'm zooming in and out on the board. I do that because I have a mouse and I use the wheelchair in the middle where I can zoom in or out. If you are not using a mouse at the moment, there is also on the bottom right, you can zoom in or zoom out on the board. And now I will zoom in on this section, on this square. And what I would like you to do is to take a post-it, so on the sticky note. So on the left you can see a bar, and there you have on the fourth icon, if you start counting from above, there is the sticky note, and that you pick one and you just write your name and your organization. See, it's quite small, but you can zoom in, zoom out, you can make it more broad, and you can drag and drop your sticky note where you want. So I hope this is working for you. If anyone has any questions or it doesn't work with someone, please shout out or say something in the chat. And otherwise, I suppose I see a lot of people making post-its, so I think it goes well. All right, so I would say we will have a small break right now. I will show again your group, the groups of this afternoon, and I will also share the link in the chat.
And also maybe a small remark, I see lots of pointers already on the left side. So if you just zoom out and you go a bit to the right, there you will find the different boards Evelyn just explained.
Yeah, maybe Evelyn, maybe you can summon everyone for starting.
Excuse me, Florian.
Maybe you could summon everyone to your view.
Yeah, indeed.
And then everyone will be on the same screen for starting.
Indeed, that would be practical. Bring everyone to me. Okay, and I see also some people who have not been divided into a group. I suggest you just pick a group based on the language you prefer. And I will post the links to the teams here. And if there are no more questions or everyone is set, I'll suggest we see each other at 2 o'clock in these breakout rooms. I see a question from Saidia.
Yes, I don't have access to the chat, so I can't take the link there.
Oh,
There's something
okay.
weird.
You don't have access to the chats. I can maybe send it to your email address, if that is okay.
Yes, that's okay.
Okay. I will look it up and I will send you an email. Anyone else not having access to the links? Could you put the links on the Miro board, perhaps? Ah, that is also a possibility. That's maybe smarter. Okay, so Saidia, I will put the links of the breakout rooms. I will put it directly on the Miro board.
Ahmed, you have a comment?
Yes. Ahmed, you have a question for us?
No, that's no problem. I don't have an access to the chat.
You don't have access to the?
Chat.
Ah, to the chat. Okay. So do you have the link? So you also don't have the link to the Miro board, but if you type in your browser, I will just spell it then maybe, or there is also on the slides.
Okay.
If you put in this link, you are on the Miro board, and there you will also find the information or the links to the breakout rooms.
Okay.
Okay, so I suggest we are moving, or we move now to the breakout room. So again, the list of the participants is pictured here, and then we will see each other at 2 o'clock in the breakout rooms, and we come back here after the exercise. Okay, I still see some people that are in the breakout rooms, but maybe we can already start. So I hope you have enjoyed the breakout session. You have learned a bit from it. You have a bit of an idea how it works to build one implementation model, or just to how to get started with it. I hope you have we succeeded and you have a small idea of how it works. And if there are any questions, we now have some time to answer them. I see a lot of questions in the other breakout rooms via the chat, but if you are all here, we can also ask them directly to us, to the facilitators. Or if you do have some feedback for us, this is also very welcome. So please, if you want to say something, you can do it via the chat, or you can also put on your microphone. Maybe because I don't see any questions popping up, I'm wondering who of the people or the participants here is planning on working with linked open data or with standards. Just to get an idea, you can reply with +1 or -1. Okay, I see Inge and Vanessa saying +1. Yeah, oh, I see only +1s. via Wikidata. Okay, maybe Inge, can you explain a bit what your plans are? Or
I will try it. Excuse me for my English. So the Museum of Geneva Museum in Hasselt, we have a lot of specific information about distilleries. And now it's in our collection management system in the data set, persons and institutions. And we also have a lot of information in Word and in PDF. And it's not yet published online. So we first want to structure the information and we want to make a data model. So for me, the workshop was really interesting. It gives me help how I can start with it. And the next step is to map it with Wikidata concepts. And then, we want to get the data in bulk in Wikidata. That's the plan. We have information about 500 distilleries, and the plan is to get 250 online because, from the 500, sometimes we only have one notice, just one object that refers to it, but no further information. So it's also important we have some archival material around it. So we have enough metadata. So that's why not all the distilleries will be published.
Okay, and do you already have some models or standards you are looking at the moment, or you're still?
I just started this month, so it's really the beginning. But I worked already longer in the museum, and the first thing I did was cleaning the data. So we had a lot of double. So one distillery. And the name was 3 times in the data set. So first I did the data cleaning, and now I have a workshop in a few weeks with other organization, ETWI, the Museum of Industry in Ghent, and SHACL in Leuven, because they also have a lot of information of industry institutions, so maybe it's interesting to make a more a data profile that's not only for the distilleries but also can use for other, like bakeries, for example, or other industries.
Yes, indeed, I think it's very useful and also good that you're talking with other partners to make your data model, because that is important. I see also Joelle is also, she replies ook via Wikidata. I don't know if you want to add something or say something.
With us, it's I work for the archive of the Provincie West-Vlaanderen. I just started actually, and my idea right now is to work with Wikidata for one of our archives that was a gift. So it was the archive of one of the conservators of the PMMK. And I want to use Wikidata to link his name to different institutions and different artists who he worked with, because we want to use his connections to make him more known. So that's why I want to use the open link data to actually get him more, that people will know him more. Because right now, if I say Willy van den Besse, not a lot of people know who I'm talking about.
Okay, thank you. And I see we have still a minute or something. I see Sven has replied in the chat. Maybe Sven, you want to say something about OpenRefine?
Yeah, maybe just quickly. So I've never used it that much in the past myself, because as a computer scientist, we have usually our other methods. This, I think, is a very nice tool for, let's say, the usual computer users who are used to Excel, because you really just see your data tabular, and then you can click on reconciliation, and you will find the tool will find for you already, let's say, from your authors or your distilleries or something. It will find already the concepts on Wikidata, and then basically you have the link already and link data in a quick way.
Okay, thank you, Sven. I don't know if there's anyone else wanting to add something or say something. I see from Inge, I use readable, en I see also hier voor Annelies van Gelder een voorbeeld van een geschreven werk. Alright. If there are no more questions, I would like to thank you all and enjoy the rest of the studiedag. I think it was already very interesting also for us. So thank you, Anne, for giving the ICEG the opportunity to give our workshop here.